1.4, we talk about adding real numbers. So we're trying to figure out how to add real numbers, in other words, positive and negative numbers. So I want to explore something real quick. So just be patient for a minute. I want to actually put a number line here. Let's make this go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And let's go backwards. -1, -2, -3, -4, -5, -6. And I just want to do this activity to kind of get an idea of what the rules would be for adding signed numbers. So let's say that I have the number 3 plus 2. So 3 plus 2 we all know is 5. But let's see how this works on a number line. So when you see 3 plus 2, that means you're going to start at 3 and you're going to jump up 2 units. So on my number line, I'm going to put a dot at 3, and then I'm going to jump forward 2 units. And notice where I end up at. I end up at the number 5, which is indeed the answer to this problem. Now 3 plus 2 is very understandable. We understand that one. But let's look at something a little bit different. Let's look at 3 plus -2. So 3 plus -2, that means you're going to start at 3. So let me put a dot at 3. And then instead of jumping forward 2 units, I'm going to jump backwards 2 units because it is a negative sign. And look at the number that I stop at. I stop at the number 1. So the answer for this is actually going to be 1. So think about what happened. You started with 3, and then you took away 2 units, and that left you with 1. Let's look even further. Let's start with a negative number. Let's say -2 plus 4. -2 plus 4. So my starting point is going to be at -2. So let's put a dot at -2. And then it says plus 4. So that means because it says plus 4, you're going to jump forward 4 units. 1, 2, 3, 4. And look what number I ended up at. I ended up at a +2, which in this case the answer is going to be +2. One more situation. Let's say I look at -3 plus a -2. So what is my starting point going to be? My starting point will be at -3. So I'll put a -3 at my starting point, and because it says plus -2, that's a negative number. That means instead of jumping forward 2, I'm going to jump backwards 2 units, and that puts me at -5. And -5 is the answer to this. So what's my point here? Let's say if I had a big number like 341 plus -101. Let's say if I had -47 plus 13. Now these are bigger numbers. I'm not expecting you to write a number line with 341 ticks on it and then jump back 101 ticks. No, that's why we have the rules on how we add signed numbers. So keep the number line in mind when you're adding these big signed numbers. So like for 341, I'm starting at 341 and then I'm adding a negative number. That means I need to jump backwards 101 units. So instead of being at 341, I'm actually going to be at a smaller number than that. Okay? Think about the second one. If I start at -47, negative 47, and then I'm adding a positive number, that means I'm going to come out of the negatives. I'm coming out of the negatives a little bit. Not completely, because I need 47 to be completely out of debt, but it will be a smaller negative number. So let's talk about the rules. There's 2 rules, and I'm actually going to switch to the other page. So let's think about if the signs are the same. And this is very important that we understand these rules. And if you ever forget, just think about the number line. So if the signs are the same, let's say if I have 2 numbers like negative 5 plus negative 3. The 2 things that you do, you take the sum of the absolute value of each number. So here's that word absolute value coming into play. So absolute value is just the positive form of each number. So the absolute value of negative 5 is 5. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. Now we're saying to take the sum, that means you add these 2 numbers together. So 5 plus 3 is going to be 8. That's step number 1. Now, step number 2 says the final answer will have the sign of the original numbers. Now, because I started out with a negative 5 and a negative 3, that means my final answer will have a negative on it. So this will be negative 8 is my final answer. Negative 5 plus negative 3 is negative 8. And think about this on a number line. If I have negative 5 and I'm going backwards 3 units, that's going to put me into a deeper negative number. Let's try an example. Let's say if I had negative 121 plus negative 25. These signs are the same. So that means I need to add these 2 numbers together. So I take 121 plus 25 and I add them together. That gives me a 6 here, 4. That's 146. And because both of my original numbers were negative, my final answer is going to be negative. So this is negative 146. Okay? That's rule number 1. Now let's look at rule number 2. So if the signs are the same was rule number 1. This is if the signs are different. So if the signs are the same, you add them together. If the signs are different, you're going to do the opposite of that. You're going to take the difference of the absolute value. Of each number. So let me put an example up. Let's say if I have negative 43 plus 121. Just picking it. So the absolute value of each one of these numbers, absolute value of negative 43 is 43. The absolute value of 121 is 121. I got to find the difference between these 2 numbers. So the difference, I'm just going to take the bigger number and subtract it, and subtract the smaller number. So I have to borrow here. It's going to be 8. And then 11 minus 4 is going to be 7. So 78 is what I got when I subtracted these 2 numbers. Now, the second step says that the final answer will have the sign of the larger absolute value. So the larger absolute value, which number is bigger, the 43 or the 121? The 121 is bigger. And when you look at the sign of the original number, it was positive. So your final answer is going to be positive. So negative 43 plus 121 is equal to 78. Let's try another example. Let's say if I had negative 32 plus 14. So let me take the absolute value of each number. The absolute value of negative 32 is 32. The absolute value of 14 is 14. And I'm going to find the difference between these two numbers. And I got 18. So I put the number 18 here. Now I need to take the sign of the higher absolute value. Which number is bigger, the 32 or the 14? The 32 is the bigger absolute value, and the sign of 32 is negative. So my final answer is going to be negative. Okay? So review this tutorial, because this is probably a very difficult concept to understand, but you want to make sure you really understand the rules. I would suggest you go back and re-watch this PDF, this Smart Pen tutorial, and make sure that it makes sense. And if you have any questions, just make sure you contact me.